Welcome to Cross Platform Podcast, where we discuss how to solve productivity problems across platforms. I'm Augusto Pinot,
Mark Delwicks.
and today we are going to be discussing about reasonable hardware expectations. And what is that? It's when you go and buy an Amazon Kindle Fire and expect that it's going to run like an iPad Pro. It is when you get a hardware that, because of lack of knowledge, because of you have unreasonable expectations, doesn't meet the requirements that you have. And then now you have this piece of hardware and what you do with it. And how to, hopefully, how to work a little bit into what it's reasonable, what is reasonable to expect. Not when you are the geek. I can spend hours looking at specs and mostly know what they mean. What happened when you don't? What can you use as a measurement so you don't waste money, but at the same time you get the performance that you need? And that is the topic of today.
It can be frustrating, especially when you're building out your hardware aspect of your productivity platform and you base decisions on what technology looks like, for lack of a better term. So if we take like tablets, for example, it's easy to fall down that rabbit hole of, oh, okay, I want to get something that works like an iPad, but not for iPad money. Well, especially in the tablet space, there's a reason why it's not at iPad money. It's because, for the most part, it doesn't have the same level of capability and functionality. Those tiers of pricing, and I'm not saying always go buy the biggest and most expensive because that's often overkill. But what I'm saying is it gives you a reasonable understanding as to what the capabilities are probably going to be available on that particular class and layer of device. So if we take something like an Amazon Kindle, well, a Kindle Fire is a great consumption device for things like videos, reading, that sort. It's not good for heavy work. It doesn't do digital linking. There's lots of ceiling limitations. Its performance is slow. Its updates are infrequent. That's what you get for the price. Now, granted, you're only paying, $100, $200 in some cases for the highest end ones, as compared to six, seven, $800 for a high end Android or iPad. So you have to be realistic as to what is this going to do. And I think that's the problem that a lot of people get into, especially if they're not familiar with the technology or they're not getting comfortable with what the technology can do, is they see something that looks like it. And often the sales and the marketing materials will say, "Hey, this, is an
This will
iPad
do everything.
replacement." Oh yeah, the times I see that this is or the worst one, this is an iPad killer. I love those articles when they start to come out. It's like, guys, what are you doing? You can't confuse people this way because that's all you're doing is confusing
That's all
people.
that you accomplish.
So when we start to look at technology as part of our productivity platform, I think we have to go back to the basics of approach excuse me, approaching this from one of two directions. You can either A, say, well, what can this particular piece of hardware do? And does that meet my needs? Or the other side, which is the better one, but it's a little bit more labor intensive, and that's understand what you need it to do first, all the possibilities, and then find the things that fit into that classification.
Right.
That's a little harder because it does require you to actually do the first one and then visit the second ones. You have to understand what's even possible out there. I got into a
So,
conversation one time, again with tablets. Somebody wanted to say, well, I want to be able to take pictures in the field and all. I'm like, why do you want to do that with a tablet? Well, because I'll have it with me. Well, yeah, but it's not the best thing to do. The cameras are not good. You've got a phone in your pocket whose camera is 10 times better than what's on your tablet. Why would you step down? Well, I'm using no. And this is where understanding what your need is and then understanding what the technology is that can meet that need, that becomes the more important part of the execution.
Mm, And I want to bring three cases. Okay, the first case is my own wife. My my wife at some point wanted to create division, distinctions, and between her personal phone, her work devices. Okay, so her work device had an iPhone, and the work device is an iPad, and in personal, she has an iPhone. And she wanted a device that she could disconnect. Okay, grab that device and don't be tempted to do all that. So she we start talking about it and said, I don't want an iPad. Okay? And the reason she do not wanted an iPad was because she did not want it to have the temptation to start connecting things. Okay? So she wanted a device to mostly read, okay, and watch TV maybe if she was traveling. So we end up having or getting a Kindle tablet, Kindle 10, Fire 10. Okay. And she loved it. Okay. But she was, even that she tells you this is not an iPad. Okay. And she's very clear, okay, on the performance limitation, especially, when she has had things like we have an app with recipes. She wanted one day to check the calendar. I said, don't even try. Okay. And pull the iPad or pull the phone. But her original concept was a device that she could basically read and do some very light browsing, etc. And the browser is where she complains about the device. Okay. But that was perfect one. Okay. It was something that will allow her to be completely separated. And in that case, even that the hardware was much more slower than everything else she had on hand, she was looking for that experience, for something that she will not have the temptation of start installing stuff and make it, another phone. So that works very well.
Okay. Before you go into your next two, the temptation thing, I don't know why that's like not sitting well with me. I
Because you are
understand.
mature and you can do that. There is people who cannot.
No, 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 no,
And
no,
I'm
no, no.
one of them,
I
by
got
the
I
way.
got 300 plus apps on my phone, so don't even talk about me being mature when it comes to app installation. Has nothing to do with it. But it does raise an interesting question, and I've heard this argument before. To get a functionally limited device so that it stays on task with what you're intending it to do. I kind of get that, but so often I have seen that backfire on people when they decide that, yes, I want to go just a little further or they are operating so close to that ceiling to start that now they don't have that capability. They have bought themselves built in frustration. And I never
Yes.
find that a good idea. If you don't want to install stuff, there are ways to get around it. There are ways to lock it down. There are ways to, you can set up profiles. There are lots of ways to do it where you don't, start adding and expanding its capability. But I don't know, it's like buying a car that can't go more than 15 miles an hour because you don't want to speed. Well, I get that, but at some point you may actually have to go to the speed limit, and you're not going to have that as an option. So you said you had two more.
Yes. And the second one goes exactly into what you said, and it was my own case. Okay. Following my wife's advice, I needed a project that was going to require tons of reading, and I was aware
Hmm.
of that, and tons of other things. And I decided to take a device outside of my ecosystem. My ecosystem is an iPad, it's Apple, and I went and got an Android. It's an Android e-reader. I knew I was going to be reading and annotating devices, so that was my criteria, and I wanted something again. This is something that I want to grab this device, and this is what I want to work with. But what happened is exactly what you described. I knew I was getting a slower device than my iPad. But what I didn't want it to do was to deal with all the other pieces. What I didn't consider is exactly what you said. As soon as I start putting things for this project, the machine was to start with going to choke, and as soon as I start using it, I drowned the machine. I killed the machine. It's just not powerful enough. It remind me, my parents had a station wagon, Buick Century station wagon in the 80s.
Wood panels? Please tell me it had wood panels in the
It
sides.
sadly, I can say it
Oh,
has wood panels. It
okay.
was awful. Okay.
Okay.
Not only that, I was around 17 years old when my parents got it. And in
Hmm.
Venezuela, you start driving at 18, so or 16 or 17. So you start driving at 18. You cannot drive at 16. So my dad said he was going to buy this real SUV, and I was with the car that I wanted. And then he went to
Okay.
the dealer and came back with this. Okay, it was really as big a deception as what the kids of the Chevy Chase Vacation movie felt. Okay, I understood that movie so good.
Okay.
Not only that, later on in life, as I learned to drive, I remember that vehicle where you push the gas, the farther you can go. And
Hmm.
all that thing did was noise. But strength going faster,
Yep.
there was none. That's what happened with this device. Is this books a bad device? No, it is not. It is just I will push the technology. I push the technology way farther than what it is. And I had unreasonable expectations for this. Why? Because what I wanted was a device that was going to allow me to read, annotate, and do like I do in my
Hmm.
iPad, but that I will have no temptations. Okay, because this project require every time I sit into this require me to really focus. What I did not thought, shame on me, but that's what happened. Okay, that I thought later was let me create another user inside of my family so I can share most of my iPads, but not synchronize, not be part of the notifications galore that I have on the others. That I thought when frustration hit very hard with this device, not before. So, and and I'm glad that you bring that before I bring the example because that is the other element. You may be aware that you are getting an underperforming device. I was not surprised what this device do. I was not surprised that was slow. I was not surprised any of that.
Hmm.
No, no. That was the intention in which I got the device. What I didn't envision, and mostly because I didn't thought through probably enough, is other things that I was wanted to require or want to do or okay with this device that this device cannot. So one of the things that happened is I start needed to keep notes, okay, and think on something and pull information to explain later. Yeah, every time you do it, this device choke, and it's not the device. It's not designed for that. This is basically a glorified Kindle. If you want to read Kindle books, you're good. When you want to push it as a tablet, it doesn't have the processor, the memory, or anything. So
Yeah.
that's very, very important to not only in the, and as I'm saying, in this case, I knew this was a very underpowered device. Okay. I wanted the e-reader ink because I knew I was going to be reading for many hours. Okay. And I wanted but didn't do it. Should I have got this device or an iPad mini and put this gray screen as I have shared here before? That's what I should have done. Okay. Why didn't do it? Well, because that's where you learn.
So
You put the expectations and you learn you need to think a little bit more next time.
so here's a thought that occurs to me as we're talking about this. Uh, when you purchase what I want to say a functionally limited device, you buy something that has a specific objective in mind, and you
Mm-hmm.
buy to meet that objective. Uh, and you run into that frustration of, oh, now I want to do something a little bit more with this. Maybe I can do something a little bit more. Uh, just because that device is functionally limited, and you have met your obligation. I mean, this is what I wanted it to do. I said I wasn't going to ask for it to do more. It doesn't change the fact that you want to now do that other thing.
Correct.
So now what you've introduced is not only a device that does just its job and nothing else, but now a frustration with, well, how am I going to do this next layer of the job? And that's where I struggle with some purchases for devices, especially technology, when people will buy things that are just powerful enough, just past that line, because you're going to bump that ceiling really quick and then you're going to be frustrated with that device. And that's how you wind up with, and I can honestly say, with drawers full of stuff,
I'm admitting
different
nothing.
versions of, yeah, you accumulate these because the device is close. It's almost what you need. And you think that, okay, maybe I can make do with this thing, just to hit this margin. Great example of that is Chromebooks. Chromebooks are wonderfully powerful. They're extremely useful devices. They're low cost. They're high flexibility. They're very versatile. And they run into their ceiling really hard when you try to do certain things. Uh, I have a Lenovo Duet 3, the little Chromebook tablet.
Hmm.
Beautiful little device, updates forever, works great, nice and portable. Little chunky, but that's okay. Problem is, it's just a little underpowered. And because it's a little underpowered, when I go from my main device, my main machine, to it doing the same task, the reduction in capability and the reduction in power is painfully obvious. Actually, almost to an exaggerated degree, because I'm used to things clicking through and opening quickly and showing up quickly. And then I go on this little guy and all of a sudden it's dragging and slow. And it's like, it's going to do the same job eventually, but I have to be realistic. It's like going to Home Depot with a Honda Civic. I'm not going to be bringing home lots of stuff. I'm not
Right.
going to bring home, 42 by 4s. It just won't do it. You need the tool to match the job plus a certain factor. Um, I, as a rule, when I go through and I do scoring exercises on what is the equipment that you need to do a certain job, I will score out a piece of equipment and then add 25% to that score to give it a little bit more headroom. So if you're looking at performance, let's say on a laptop, and you think that I'm just going to use this for Microsoft Office, great. Then get one that can do Microsoft Office and maybe low end gaming. You may never
Hmm.
game on it. You may never run a single game besides Solitaire on it or Minesweeper, if you can find Minesweeper. Uh, but what you may do then is you're going to give yourself just that little bit of headroom that you're going to need to extend the life of that particular device.
Correct.
And I think that's the other thing that is most disconcerting to me about lower end devices is not so much the fact that they can't do their jobs, it's that they do have a very short lifespan. They run out of updates quickly. They're not as well built, so they tend to break. Or they use older technologies rather than underpowered to hit that lower price point. So therefore, you wind up with a device that the technology gets phased out much sooner than what you would have on a slightly higher end device. So, what was your third example?
So the third example, and let me go before you go more to the third example. The you made a very good point, and you're making me thinking here as we discuss, because again, that project is still ongoing and that device is still not working. So what I did is I pull an old iPad, okay, and that's when I came to the idea of create. I have a family group, so I create just another user. Okay, so that way it do not synchronize with many of the things, but I can get the apps and don't need to buy them again. And that was always should have bought this instead of, but it's important to understand many times we will not be able to see what is that extra thing. You can see very clearly, and I said in this example, it was very clear what I wanted to do. I wanted to get ink, I wanted to be able to dump into that books and PDFs. I wanted to annotate PDFs. That was my original vision. That didn't do that flying colors. Right?
Mhm.
The problem was, again, the little extra, as you said, what is the buffer that are you going to buy yourself? And that's what I did not consider in that machine. So the last example tied with that buffer, and it's a client of mine. He just bought an iPad mini. And when he asked me, I told him, go to the 256. The iPad mini come in
Mhm.
64 and 256. And he looked at me and say, why? And say, because you're not replacing this machine in the next 12 months, most likely. So the more space that you can get, that you can afford the difference, get the largest amount of space you can. He had, like me, his idea what this machine was going to be. Therefore, 64 was the number. Okay.
Mhm.
5 weeks later, 64 is not the number. Okay. And there is a lot of frustration about
Yeah.
this. And one thing that we look when we talk about storage, the persons who go tomorrow and replace a phone, okay, and you're going to replace your phone, and now what should I get? Well, capabilities is one, storage is second. On storage, I my advice to people is look at your current storage and double whatever you're using right now. Build your phone. Oh, I'm using 64. Then your next device need to be at least 128. If you're using 128 to 56 and so far so on. Why? Because most likely your space consumption will double by the time you get to upgrade that device. And there is nothing more frustrating than have a device that you still is functional, you still like it, but now you are all short into memory. You cannot download the app or the music or whatever it is. So that comes again. It's part of those, you know, not having reasonable hardware expectations. This person was going to know 64 will be plenty. And I told him exactly what I just said, double what you have. And double what he had in his case was 128. So I said, then you need 256 because there is no 128. So those are things that are very, very important. And I understand not everybody had the knowledge, but that is the kind of advice that you want to give forward. That is the kind of purchases that you want to make. Because otherwise, as you said, you turn that fun, nice, cool experience into frustration very, very, very soon. And unless you are a geek, now most people, the problem is they stay stuck with that thing. Most of
Mhm.
the people that I work with, they don't, oh, well, I hit 64. And this is a perfect example. Okay. This client of mine who hit 64 is not thinking, well, that's fine. I'll go to Apple tomorrow and replace it. No, because now he's thinking I spend X amount of $100. Okay. And so he called me and said, okay, how can I get less information in this thing so I can still use it? Yes. But now it's not the same experience. Can he get it down to 64 to make it happen? Yes. Is that the experience he was looking for? No. So that's gets very, very key on these hardware expectations. As you said, the Chromebooks, this was not an example, but it's something that happened a couple of weeks ago. My friend Michael Slewinski was visiting here, and we were talking. My daughter is going to high school next year, so we were talking about a computer. Okay, we're buying for her, and I told him I'm buying this, and I buying a 512 hard drive, and he looked at me and say no, and say why not? You need to go at least 1 terabyte. And I say, why? Because you're thinking as an adult with Dropbox, she's going to use that as their storage and she's going to dump it with pictures and screenshots and music and a bunch of stuff. And I was like, oh, valid point. But comes back to what are the hardware expectations? Okay. I'm thinking this machine from my perspective. So what I thought is I will get this MacBook Air. I will max the RAM so that way the machine is useful for the longest. On the hard drive, I double what I use. But I didn't thought the user is not my age, is my daughter, and she will need to learn how to manage that. So can you go to that 1 terabyte of storage so that way she start on something that is going to accomplish my goal, that is to have a machine that can last them long. But
Yeah,
it all comes to that expectation.
I agree. Storage is probably the one thing that most people underestimate the need and impact of. And I can give you a couple of key ties to that. One is the what I call the iceberg effect of apps on iOS and Android.
Mhm.
When you look at your app screens, all applications are equal. The icons are the same size. So mentally, now I have no evidence of this, but perceptually, I think people view them as taking up the same space in your phone then.
Right.
They're all the same icon, they're all the same apps. If I put in an app, it's this big. Well, I think many of the applications, if you look more closely at them, that have an iceberg effect where Spotify, for example, could take up 2 gig, 3 gig, 4 gig on your phone for no reason, aside from just having files downloaded.
Oh,
Some applications will rack up a huge amount of storage just because of caching effects. And there's nothing that will diminish the experience on a device more than having to spend time installing and uninstalling apps to be able to do things. Storage is much less expensive than processor speed or RAM. RAM's fairly inexpensive, but storage is still cheaper than that.
yeah.
And storage is something that you can expand on most things, you can expand externally as well. Now, on phones, it's a little bit different because it's a little harder to expand externally on phones unless you happen to have a phone that has a micro SD card. One of the
Right.
strengths on a lot of Android phones is that they do still have the ability to have a micro SD card in them, so you can expand the storage capability there. But if we take it outside the phone realm, we look at tablets, um, that storage capacity, if you cannot expand it, you need to get as much storage as you can afford. Uh, it's absolutely going to be worth it
Mhm.
because if you can't add it on, you're stuck when you use it up.
Right.
You have to start clearing stuff out then. The storage component is big. We talk about the RAM part of it. We think about getting, a 4 gig, an 8 gig, a 16 gig machine. RAM ties to speed. We always think processors what is the determination of speed. RAM is the determination of how many different things you can be doing at once and how much work your computer is going to have to do swapping things in and out of memory once you start to fill that RAM up. So having, let's say, a laptop, 8 gig to me is a minimum anymore. If it's
Oh,
going to
really?
be a true,
16? I will say I will not advise anybody go below 16 unless a
yeah,
Chromebook.
uh, I would still argue that eight's usable in many circumstances, especially, for example, if you're going to be doing something like just straight Microsoft 365 or something like that. Because at that point, you're typically not running as many simultaneous applications. However, that rapidly changes if you start to do something like, oh, I don't know, audio editing, video editing,
Mhm.
anything like that. And it used to be where we would talk about doing things like audio and video and that sort as a very small group of people who were doing that. Well, now that's built-in functionality into things like PowerPoint and
Right.
Microsoft Office, where I can go in and I can edit video and render video from my machine. Well, rendering speed is going to be determined not only based on processor, but on available RAM. So, and it's going to require that storage to take that couple of gig file that it's going to spit out. And what are you going to do with that?
Correct.
So, all of that has to come into play. And if you've gone low end on your hardware purchase for your primary device or the device that's going to be asked to do that job, you're going to be sorely disappointed with the result. You may get a result, you may get a usable result, but you're not going to get the best experience and the most efficient experience in producing that end result. And that's what all this is about, is what are the efficiencies you can have. So one of the things that I look at a lot, especially when we start to think about making this choice. Right? If I were to start from scratch and start to set up my hardware platform,
Mhm.
what would I do? And I don't know that I would necessarily say get, this hardware or that hardware or this hardware. My argument is typically you have three devices as the core of any personal productivity platform. The one is your primary device, whether that's a laptop or a desktop or whatever. The one device that you know that will
Even
be,
sorry, let me stop you there, because the primary device could be your phone, and I have worked now with clients that's their primary device. It's not their laptop, it's not their tablet, it's that iPhone.
it can be. I would still argue that that is definitely the exception to the rule because of form factor limitations and things like that. But let me finish where I was going with that.
Mhm.
Your primary device has to be the device that is capable of doing everything you need to be able to do.
Correct.
It has to be able to execute all of the jobs. Because if the other devices are not available, it's the only one you have to do it on. It's the one that's going to have to step up and take the tasks to measure. Now, certain things like phone calls and that's a whole different discussion. The second device you have is the sidekick. That's the personal digital assistant, whatever that is, that plays the second role to your primary device. That needs to be able to do about 75% of what you can do on the primary device. It needs to be able to give you access to the information that you would have at the primary device, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the equivalent to the primary. So
Mhm.
when you think about in most setups, you'll have like a laptop and your phone. The phone can do the bulk of the things. It can edit documents, it can show things. It's not like working on a desktop, but it's pretty darn close. And it gives you at least, it gets within that 80-20 rule. The third device, if you're going to add a third device in, this is the one that creates the triangle of functionality. So often people will think, okay, so I'm going to have this big device at the top. I'm going to have this little device at the bottom. And in the middle, I'm going to have an iPad, or I'm going to have a tablet, or I'm going to have a Kindle or something that's going to allow me to consume content and interact with things, but it's not really a heavy duty working device. Where I think people run into the problem is they do exactly that. They view that as a spectrum of devices, they view that as a line, but it's not. They are separate but equal devices within your structure. View it as a triangle because the capabilities of what you can do on your tablet won't necessarily translate the same way to your desktop and to your phone.
Mhm.
And the example I'll use is Digital Link. Digital Link is one of those things that most primary devices don't support. And it's one of those things that most phones don't support. But you can do a lot of digital linking on tablets. So when you start to think about that functionality and how those interrelate, by creating that productivity triangle, for lack of a better term, and then applying the tasks and the information that you have to work with to that triangle, you can start to get some reasonable, realistic expectations as to what you can do, where, and how you can do it. Example,
Right.
when I do graphic editing, I use a program, Canva. Lots of people use Canva. Great program. Canva has a web-based part of it, and it has an Android application, and it has a Windows application. So on the three primary devices that I'm talking about, or the three devices I'm talking about, there's an implementation of Canva on each one. Can I do the exact same things? Up to about 90% I can. There are certain things that don't translate well, one versus the other versus the other. And I have to see on that Venn diagram of functionality between these hardware platforms, where are the overlaps? If I'm doing like rapid design of, let's say, merchandise, using my primary device and my tablet is a great way to do that. I can go back and forth, I can work with the creative structures easy. If I need to publish and create things on the fly out in the field, my phone and my tablet are the best ways to do that. Why? Because the odds are pretty good my primary device is not going to be with me. If I'm trying to create content that leverages images and photos, that's probably going to be my desktop and my phone, because, or my laptop and my phone, because I'm going to work back and forth that way. So those relationships are what help determine what I can reasonably expect out of each of those devices. Where things start to go off the rails is when you now add additional devices into this mix that don't fit into that triangle, or kind of slide in between those spots, because then you're really not sure what their job is supposed to be. They're neat to have, but the definition of their role is left out in the open, and that's what can cause confusion. That's what can cause frustration. So that's why I say you need to go back, and you've done this, we've talked about this in the past with your technology cards,
Mhm.
is look at a device and say, hey, these are the things that I will do on this device, and these are the things I'm not going to try and do on this device. I'm going to look at my phone and say, could I write an entire 8-paragraph blog article on this device? Yes, I could. Will I? No. Why? Because it's not the optimal experience. It's not the most efficient, it's not the most effective, and ultimately I'm going to waste time, energy, and increase my frustration by doing that.
And remember, is the optimal for you? Because as I was hearing you, and I said this for our listeners, my main device is an iPad. Okay. And it's actually an iPad 11-inch. And I have another iPad, okay, that I use that is normally there with me. But it's, as you said, that's not the main machine. That is, oh, I want to do the things. This size is better. And I understand I'm spoiled in the sense that I have access to the different sizes, so I can spoil myself to, oh, this is going to be. In my case, that is an iPad. The answer is always an iPad. The question is, what is the size of the screen that I want to deal with? And but that change, where are you comfortable with that, as you said? And that's where you need to figure it out. And recently I mentioned at this client who he fight or had fight with me about his phone being his main device. And we finally come to the he comes to the realization that, oh, but the problem is I cannot do, and then he make a list of things. I say, I understand. But when you do those things, say, oh, I only do that at the end of the day when I get home. That is my shutdown, routine. That's not my day to day happen on the phone, as you've been telling me
Mm-hmm.
for quite a while. Say, fine. Then now what we need to look is not what is your main device. It's how we can maximize that shutdown time for you. Okay.
Right.
And interestingly enough, what we end up doing was we got a small tablet, okay, and we got a keyboard with the back, so that way he can put the keyboard. Okay, it's a full size keyboard with a back, so he can put the tablet in portrait mode with his phone next to it. Okay, because he's thinking on this tablet to do the processing, the thinking. The tablet is fine. Okay, the reason he don't want to do it on the phone is because I'm looking at that phone all day. He wants to see it on the keyboard. He wants to do so. That works incredibly well. What my surprise was not a computer. Same with him. I thought, okay, fine, then we get the PC for that or the Mac. And he was like, yeah, I don't know. Can we make it even more? And we start looking into the option of the tablet. And was that the key for him was to not lose the phone. So the phone stays in the thing because are side by side. So he can grab the phone to do the work, and then this device is just so he can shut down, process certain thing, type faster in the keyboard instead of the phone. The second thing that happened with this person was that we got a keyboard for his phone,
Mm.
because then in many cases he will sit in there and wanted to type faster, but he didn't want it to
Yeah.
carry anything else. So, but the only reason we got to that tool, okay, was when we put the correct hardware expectation. The moment he were in agreement that their mobile phone was the main device, then he stopped accessorizing everything else in his world. Okay, he had the nice laptop and he had the other tablet, and okay, but none of them worked. Why? Because the main device was the phone. Then, the moment he realized that, then he changed the expectation. And the next expectation for, okay, how can I get now this device and accessorize it so I can do even more? Okay. And that's what works in this particular case incredibly well for this person.
It's interesting you talk about that. The phone itself is such a fascinating device to me in the equation. I still will make the argument all the time we need to stop calling them phones because nobody uses them to make calls anymore.
True.
Uh, if you go back to in ye olden days when we had PDAs and Palm Pilots and that sort, those were the types of jobs we were asking those devices to do, to be those secondary devices and be those support devices. We never expected them to be able to be a primary device because the power and the technology just wasn't there. The power and technology is here with these types of devices. It is easy enough to do. You can set up and accessorize up. In the Samsung ecosystem, for example, using something like Samsung DeX, you can use a DeX dock, you can hook a monitor to a keyboard, mouse, whatever. You basically have a very powerful computer in your pocket. You can use it for that capability. So it's not unrealistic to make that the center of your world. But just through this conversation, what people should be getting is that it takes planning, it takes thought, it takes consistent exercise, and it takes a willingness to kind of put rails around certain things and understand that I'm going to be able to do this, that, and the other thing on it, but I'm not going to be able to do X, Y, Z on it. And just say you're not going to be able to do it and don't try it and don't spend your time trying to do it. That's where I think a lot of people, myself included, will get hung up on this idea of, well, maybe I can make it do the following. Maybe I can push its boundaries that much further. Well, if you're spending time and energy to push the boundaries of a device, uh, odds are pretty good that it's not going to do that really well. And that's time you could be spending doing something else if it doesn't have to be done on that device. Now, I have had situations where I have asked a device to do something that it's really not good at, but that's what the instance or the situation demanded. I had
Right.
to update a website uh, from a soccer match in a stadium. And I'm like, okay, the only thing I have is my phone with me. And we're going to see if this works. And was it the best situation? No,
No.
not by any reach. Was it done? Yes, I was able to
Yes.
accomplish what I needed to do. Do I want to do it again? No, but it is within that buffer zone. I know that the device I have has enough horsepower that it can handle something like that should it be called on to do it. And I
Right.
think that's ultimately what we're talking about is don't overbuy your technology. Don't buy the biggest, fastest, greatest, most powerful thing if you're never going to approach it. But also don't get something that's way underpowered or undersized just because it's the least expensive thing out there. If it's worth having, it's worth it being good.
Correct.
And this, what occurs to me is this dovetails a lot into our conversation from last week about ecosystems. Because when we start to think about ecosystems, often the ecosystems have all these components in them. Apple has in their ecosystem, those three main components of that triangle, same way Samsung does, same way Google is starting to have now. Matter of fact, Google just announced today that
The
they're going to
tablet.
have their Fold phone coming out,
Yep.
which the foldable devices, this could actually be a whole different show for us, but I think the foldable devices are trying to do two of the 3 points on that triangle. They're trying to be the phone and be the tablet. I don't know that they necessarily do the tablet part extremely well yet, but it's also highly portable. So if I take my example from earlier of having to update a website at a soccer match, a foldable phone probably would have made that easier. More
Better
screen real
than, yeah.
estate. Yeah, I would have had that capability there. So it's providing options, but again, they have to be considered options. They
Yeah.
have to be. Now, for your guy who says that this is his primary device, a foldable phone might be
It
absolutely
might
in
be
his sweet
absolutely
spot.
perfect.
Maybe perfect for him because
And
he's then got that. But it also may be horrible if he happens to work, I don't know, out in the field a lot where he's got something that's not going to survive. Again, all factors that have to come into
all those
into
factors, and I, as an Apple user, I have always envied the DeX concept, okay, the Android concept of that you can connect that thing to a larger and make it a computer. And I will love for Apple to do that, okay. And actually, that concept even before came from the Palm Pilot. Okay, there was this device called the Foleo, and I was able to play with it. And I sadly the company didn't have enough cash to survive to get the
Yep.
product out, but that product I thought it was brilliant. You were going to buy a Trio and connect it to this 10-inch computer and work in a
Yep.
full computer. I was so looking forward to one. And I had a good friend of mine who got one of the demo units, and I was able to play for more hours than I care to admit. We play with that thing. It was fantastic. And that was a fantastic concept. And out of the Android, okay, Microsoft has this Surface that flip. I don't
The
remember
Duo.
exactly the
Yeah.
Duo, and I think again, same thing. It's a brilliant concept. I love the size of the iPad Mini. I will love to be able to have exactly that device. I'm just not willing
Mm.
to go to Android, okay, where I have an iPad Mini and then whoop, open it when I want the double of the screen size. So I think the folding it's coming to mix those three into two eventually. I don't know when that is going to happen. The reality is tablets are getting so powerful. When you think I begin iPad only on the first iPad, okay?
Hmm.
I understood that with all the limitations the first iPad had, and the list was very, very long, okay, on limitations, that device could replace, for what I did at the time, most of what I do. So I begin leaving stuff behind. I by the second generation, by the first generation, I leave one laptop because now I carry one iPad and a laptop. By the second generation, I start leaving a scanner and other things because now I have a camera that I could take the scanner and you will never know that was not a scanned document. And the software start coming where you could do all those
Hmm.
things. So little by little, start replacing everything that I had on my bag, and now I have a little bag. So but when you think that my current iPad has the same processor as the MacBook we are using to talk, that is still shocking for me. The fact
Absolutely.
that Apple may or may never do it, but having the same processor, okay, these iPads will be able to run Mac OS. They will be able to run Windows. I can run Windows on the MacBook, same processor. So it's just a matter really of hardware, not a matter of anything else. When it's going to happen, I don't know, but it's going to happen, and probably sooner than what we think. Where you now will be able to go to buy your Windows capable or your Mac capable or your Android capable or your iPad capable and have now a choice into what is the form factor that works for you, not what the machine can do. Because when you look into Samsung and the Surface and the MacBooks, it is not right now, it's not a game of capability. You have more power under any of those machines than what you can or most people can use. It's now what are the form factors, what are the accessories, what is the work that I do for which this or that form factor will work. What are the things that I'm used to? Do I want multiple screens? Do I need multiple screens? Now with the iPad that you can connect to other monitors, do you want to have, like I have, multiple iPads, or you want to have multiple screens and you just connect to the screens? So the game is changing, but the hardware expectations are now maybe more critical than what they were when you had very capable device and not so much capable devices.
Yeah, it's interesting now when we start to look at the devices themselves. If somebody were to ask me, what should I buy? I'm starting from scratch. Not recommending specific manufacturers or anything like that. I would say that a good mid-range laptop with a fairly large display, 15 inches or higher, because that laptop is probably not going to be schlepped around with you very much.
Mhm.
Get something like that. The second device would be a tablet then, a tablet to fill the second part of the gap. And if you have that tablet, you have a much lower likelihood of needing to carry the laptop around. I do that often. If I'm going to go to a client's site, I'll just grab my tablet and take it with me. Why? Because my tablet has a keyboard that's part of the case. So it's basically a mini laptop. It can access what I need to. I can take notes on it. It works fine. It also means, though, that that primary device is not at risk out in the real world. It can stay in its on its safe little shelf and be happy, collecting a little bit of dust every now and then, and that sort of thing. So figuring out those pieces, uh, I think phones have actually complicated a little bit, talking about things like Samsung Dex. Being able to turn your phone into this full-fledged device, yeah, you can absolutely do it. And I think one of the things that we're starting to see, I don't I don't recall if iOS offers the mirroring to the desktop or not, but I know you can do that
On
now
the
with
iPad, you
Windows.
can. On the phone, not yet. You can
Okay.
do the mirroring, but it doesn't work very well.
Yeah, with Windows and Phone Link, you can mirror your phone's screen directly on
Mhm.
your Windows machine as if it were just another window and interact with the apps that way, which can be very helpful and very useful if you're trying to do something that those specific apps do. So again, it's a matter of mapping that structure out. But we revisit the same point we bring up all the time. Figure out what you need to do and then figure out the places that you can do it in. Not only just from the hardware standpoint, but also physical locations. Do I need to be able to do this in remote locations? Do I want to be able to do this in remote locations? This is one of the reasons why e-readers, especially like the low-end Kindles, are very popular, because if I want to go read outside, well, really powerful tablets often don't have the screens that lend themselves to that kind of thing, or they have too long of a battery draw, or there's other factors that have to come into play. So figuring out what is realistic, create your technology cards like you've done, Augusto, put that mapping together, and be willing to tell yourself, no, I'm just not going to do that on this particular device. It doesn't make sense. Go get the device that is more capable of doing this. You'll be much more satisfied, more effective, and ultimately more productive.
Yep.
Any other thoughts on this?
No, I think that's all that I have for today.
Well, I think that if we have, for any of our listeners, I would love to hear over in Personal Productivity Club, what's your realistic hardware? What's the hardware setup that you've given yourself that you know can do the jobs you need to do? And honestly, have you made, like I'm sure everyone has, have you made technology purchases that have not met expectations? And how did they not meet expectations? Did they not live up to their billing? Or did you over or underestimate what they were going to do for you?
Mhm.
Come over to Personal Productivity Club and let us know.
Yeah. Follow us where you like to listen to podcasts, like us or subscribe to us, and leave us a review. As Art says, you can interact with us always in personalproductivity.club. We're Gusto Pinot and Argel Wicks, and see you next time from your favorite device. And I hope is one where you have reasonable hardware expectations. Thank you.